so much, everyone, for joining us during the lunch hour. We really appreciate it. My name is Anihana Gwinjida, and I'm the Development Associate at the Climate Action Accelerator, and we're really happy to have you here for our first webinar, where we really want to share with you ALIMA's first exercise and really the process going behind it, the values and the principles, and as well as where it's going next starting in 2022. A few things to mention: this session is being recorded and will be available later, along with all the other relevant materials like the roadmap, and everything else will be shared with you. We're going to have a dedicated moment at the end for dialogue, so we really look forward to having an exchange with all of you, where we can answer your questions, just have an exchange around the presentation. I think that's it for me. I'm going to give the floor to Bruno and Henri, who are both going to introduce the Climate Action Accelerator and ALIMA, and then proceed for the presentation.
Yeah. So hello to everyone, and thanks for attending the webinar. We have many different organizations represented, and it's really great. So just a few words for those who don't know the Climate Action Accelerator. It's a non-for-profit initiative based in Geneva. It was created about a year ago. And in a nutshell, I mean, everyone is aware of the impacts and consequences of global warming in the coming years and next decade. But the Climate Action Accelerator is very much focused on how to get into action and how to actually reduce organizations' footprints within the next few years. So put words in practice, and for this we work along three main axes. It's helping organizations to halve their emissions by 2030, assembling the expertise and the know-how and working hand in hand to get from words to reality. The second is how to contribute to a domino effect in society by putting others on board and turning our partner organizations into vectors of change. And the third is the community of practice, open source, which in itself, by giving easy access to knowledge and experience, it will help to accelerate the whole move. And very happy to pass the ball to Henri from ALIMA.
Thank you, Bruno. Good afternoon, everyone. Really my pleasure to share ALIMA's experience and early lessons on the development and the implementation of ALIMA's environmental approach and roadmap 2030. Before we dig a little bit further on that, I just would like to share key points about ALIMA so that you know where we start the journey from. ALIMA is a humanitarian, medical and research organization. It's a young organization. It has been founded in 2009 with rapid operational development. We now work in 12 countries in Africa, mostly in complex settings, conflict-affected areas, outbreaks-prone areas. We mainly work in the field of nutrition, pediatrics, response to outbreaks, with a specific work on viral hemorrhagic fevers like Ebola. And every time we have the opportunity, we add a research component to investigate, evaluate treatment strategies and so on to accelerate access to medical action in Africa. ALIMA is today has an overall budget in 21 of around 63 million euros. We are about 2,000 full-time staff, mainly from the countries of interventions, mainly medicals and paramedicals. We support directly and work within 350 health facilities in Africa, 33 hospitals. And last year, we treated close to 1.5 million patients and have an overall number of beneficiaries of 3 million. So this is to give you the rough idea of the shape of ALIMA. So why is ALIMA taking action and decided to develop an environmental approach and a roadmap? I mean, at the global scale, ALIMA is not the issue with regard to the climate emergency, definitely. So why would we add pressure and complexity to our mission? Well, this is quite simple. Huh? First thing is that we are a pragmatic organization. We do research, we do science, and the global consensus, scientific consensus on the global warming and the climate emergency is unequivocal. And I mean, the change and the shift with regard to human habits, human practices, in order to limit the increase in the temperature is crystal clear and is time bound. So as a medical organization, there is no debate about this awareness with regard to the consensus. The second point is that for years now, we have some debates and feedbacks within ALIMA, mostly from the field. And firsthand, we are witnessing some consequences of the global warming and the deterioration of the environment in our projects, on the people, on the health condition of the people, on their living habits, and this really questioning our model and our action within ALIMA. In addition to that, if you try to compare the map of the most vulnerable countries in terms of being affected by the climate change and the map of the countries of interventions of ALIMA, well, you have a match. Huh? So definitely we work in the countries that are the most impacted and the most vulnerable to climate change. And this is really questioning us about how do we shape our model or adapt our model and our interventions in the coming years to still being able to do quality medical actions in a context that will definitely change. One of the basics, and you know that in the principle of medical actors and humanitarians is the fact that you should not contribute to the deterioration of the environment, whatever it be, of the people you're supposed to serve. And this is also a key principle that makes that we need to be coherent with our principles. In ALIMA, again, we are a pragmatic organization, and the tipping points with regard to deciding to take action was clear. It was that solution exists. We don't start with a white sheet. Solutions are documented to adapt the practice, to adapt the way we work, and so on. Some are able to be adapted to the model of ALIMA and to our activities without compromising our missions, our medical missions. And this is the key thing. And that gives us the room for maneuver and the room for action, definitely. And then the DNA of ALIMA is the charter of ALIMA. It's where we have our core principles. And one of those core principles is the fact that we want to contribute to transform humanitarian medicines. So as we continue to try to innovate with regard to care, to treatment, and so on, we also need to adapt our model to be ready for the coming years. Slide. So when we decided to move forward, it was important to take two key decisions. The first one was to take the commitment for action at the right level, and this is why we had a specific approach at ALIMA, and we decided to have debates at the highest level of the organization, meaning the General Assembly of ALIMA. And this is where the decision of moving forward and having an environmental radical roadmap was decided and endorsed, meaning that this is not a side project. This is not an advocacy project. This is the priority of the entire organization, led by the General Assembly and the Executive Committee. The second decision we took was also very important for us. That, of
One
course,
small point, can we ask everyone to mute their microphones just in case I'm hearing some background noise, just so you can hear Henri well. Thank you.
yeah, thank you. So the approach we had was not to have only a decarbonation approach. It was key, of course, it's at the center of the battle plan, but we wanted to have a more broader approach, meaning that we also want to work on the adaptation of our practice at project level in terms of reducing the polluting activities that we have and the impact that we have on the ecosystems as well. We also wanted to introduce the question of climate/health and projects in our research and innovations activities. Slide, please. Thank you. Of course, we needed support and expertise. That's why we decided to work with the Climate Action Accelerator. I mean, we are medicals, we are humanitarians. We don't know a lot about the strategies and approach that we need to put in place in the coming years. So we definitely needed support and expertise. But when we decided to work with Bruno and the team, it was important for us to have a consensus on essential principles. First one, integrity and determination. That kind of approach needs times, it needs leaderships, it needs decision, because definitely it will change and it will require an adaptation of the model and the process within the organization. And we wanted to be very clear on the objectives, targets, and the means that we require to do so. The second point is the mobilization of resources. Get ready for it. It requires a shift in terms of investments, in terms of priorities. You need to invest in human, you might need to invest in expertise, and you also need to plan the investments and the way you move forward. It doesn't mean that it costs a lot. It means that you need to get ready and to organize your battle plan in order to reach the goals. Third, humility. Of course, we are committed. Of course, we want to move the organization. Of course, we have solutions that we need to move forward. But it's important to bear in mind that monitoring is key, and adaptation and agility is key. And maybe the room for maneuver that you have with regard to one of the solutions will be challenged. And then you will have some innovation with regard to another solution. So you really need to adapt your plan on and on so that you know that you are on the right path. And then last but not least, and I already mentioned that the key point, the starting point for us at ALIMA is that we are going to shift, we are going to move forward, we are going to adapt our model, but it will not compromise our medical mission. So it's important because when this is your red line, you will use it as your indicator to select the solution, to evaluate the feasibility of some of them, so that you bear in mind that you can continue exactly what you want, the mission that you get, even if the means will somehow be different. Slide, please. Over to you, Bruno, on the methodology.
Yeah, thanks, Henri. A few words on the methodology. So ALIMA and the Climate Action Accelerator worked hand in hand over 9 months to actually co-construct this roadmap. And we went through several phases to do so. But once the strategic decision had been made by ALIMA, and starting with a state of affairs, making sure that all the staff in ALIMA can actually participate to the process with propositions, but also feedbacks on feasibility. And then we really went through, I would say, quite an in-depth analysis of feasibility and especially the balance between impact, carbon impact, environmental impact, co-benefits, and then I would say conditions of success, costs, human investments, because there is a need for any organization to prioritize what actually is achievable and provides the best impact. And this was, I would say, several workshops concentrated on this. And then we decided to go on, what should be the intensity of efforts for each solution, and how could this be modelized into a trajectory allowing to reach, well, the overall target, which is, a radical reduction of the footprint of ALIMA by 2030, and defining, intermediary targets, etc. So I would say that what's important to see is that this quantification is based on scenarios, of course, and we'll go through it later. It was possible for the carbon, but it's not yet possible for the waste aspect, because there is not a monitoring system in place, at least in 2021. So it has to be put in place for the future, and then it will be integrated. And finally, the drafting of the roadmap and the work on the indicators. I think what's maybe interesting for everybody attending this webinar is to see that the footprint measurement was done in parallel. So, and this is quite original, because we actually started working on the roadmap based on a hypothesis that became more and more precise over time. And of course, the modeling of the trajectory was based on the precise footprint results. But what it means that a lot of the identification of solutions, preparatory work on feasibility, etc., can be done in parallel to the footprint. And this is already an accelerator. It means that within 9 months to 1 year, both can be done jointly, and then pave a way forward. Okay. Next. So we'll focus now on the footprint reduction part. It's important to say that the roadmap itself is larger than footprint reduction. There are also aspects linked to programs, and notably health and environment programs. But in this presentation, we'll focus more on the footprint aspects. Okay. So first of all, the carbon footprint of ALIMA was measured for 2019. It was decided to go for the year before the COVID pandemic, because we believed it would be more representative of the activities of the organization, and so this is the baseline. What came out of this baseline measurement is, without surprise, that you have basically 3 big categories which make 97% of the footprint. It echoes what other organizations have found equally. So basically procurement purchases and fixed assets make almost 40%. Then you're going to have all the transport related activities, whether it's for goods or for people, and transport of people should not be underestimated. It's actually greater than freight. And finally, all that's linked to energy use in buildings due to material and cooling, and etc. The rest is relatively marginal, and so an organization like ALIMA, which has about more than 60 million budget, greater than that, emits, according to this measurement, around 13,000 tons of CO2 equivalent in 2019, and knowing that there's a relatively large margin of error around this, of uncertainty, which is typical of carbon footprint measurements. So I would say plus or minus a third. And it's actually a challenge for the measurement to become more and more precise over the years. Next. Now, what was interesting is that we did an estimation in the process of 220, so a year later. And what we found, I would say, showed two things. So first, that of course there was an impact of COVID on travel. So business travel by air is actually almost half what it was in 2019, but it doesn't change the trend, which is an increase. So actually from one year to another, there was an increase, and not a small increase, a very significant increase, simply due to the fact that operations of ALIMA were expanding. And what this shows is that, you know, if we were just on a business as usual course, there would be a constant expansion of emissions over the next years. And especially for a dynamic organization like ALIMA, which is growing in its activities, it's very likely that CO2 emissions would grow almost proportionally. Next. Not the one before. Yeah. So when we look at what we call flows with the carbon footprint, what we see is that there's basically a small third that comes from the direct emissions of ALIMA, which is very much linked to fossil fuel use, whether it's for generators or vehicles. And the rest is actually marginal when it comes to direct emissions, but you have a big 2/3 which are external to the organization, and which here come from purchase of products. And for ALIMA, it comes mainly from MSF supply for medicine and medical material and nutritional products. And then you're going to find a lot linked to fuel consumption, air freight, business travel. I mean, these flows represent the overwhelming majority in the footprint. Next. And I'll hand the floor to Henri on solutions.
Yes, thank you. Very quickly, so at the end of the process of evaluation of solutions, potential of solutions, efficiency of solutions, feasibility, we ended up with, and we wanted a very limited pack of solutions rather than a long list. So we ended up with 20 solutions for ALIMA, not only on the reduction of greenhouse gases emissions, but on the more broader approach. And the key families for those solutions are transport, of course, procurement and supply, the use of energy and of the buildings, the waste management, and a more cross-cutting family of activities about the change of behaviors with regard to digital and others. Slide. But again, within those 20 solutions, and based on the analysis of the carbon footprint report of ALIMA, it's clear that you have we ended up with 5 key solutions of success that needs to be implemented as a priority for ALIMA, because it stands for 45% of the carbon reduction efforts over the 9 coming years. And these 5 solutions are the following ones. Maximize the switch from air to sea freight for our supply. We already started some efforts on that, but this is a real game changer. Second one is a new approach and a rationalization of the business travel, the staff travel, especially by air. As mentioned to Bruno, it represents a large part of the emissions. Third one is the increase of the efficiency of the energy and the rationalization of it for our vehicle in the field. The fourth one is the implementation of environmental criteria and environmental assessments with regard to our programs to identify the impact of our program with regard to the local environment. And then, last but not least, a very voluntary shift from the ongoing use of fossil energy to renewable energy on our programs, mainly through a solar policy that we need to implement. As mentioned, in the frame of our broader approach, it's important for us and for the team to have core priorities and solutions with regard to the project level and optimization and adaptation of our practice, and particularly with regard to the more pollutive. So the solution selected are the following ones: replace plastic with alternative solutions. So from the initial supply side to the use very locally level, reduce the local pollution from our waste management, and so improve, rationalize our management of the waste, whatever it is, medical, biomedical, non-medical waste. It includes the third solution. The fourth solution is prevent and limit environmental degradation caused by the projects, and then preserve water resources based on the environmental assessments that we want to improve, put in place systematically for our programs. Bruno?
Once the big solutions, the main solutions were basically identified, this is when we started actually modeling what a trajectory could look like over time. Because if you don't have a quantified approach on basically reducing the footprint, well, there's very little chance that after a few years you end where you want to be. And so we took 2020 as a baseline, and with 20 solutions that were selected based on basic, impact, effort, and compatibility with operations, we looked at what intensity of effort was basically both feasible and necessary to reach the target. Okay. We took into account also a certain number of what we call structural effects, which are external effects, and which are a mix of different phenomena. It's basically what will the energy mix of the different countries of operation look like in 5 to 10 years? What will be a likely pathway of some of the main producers, etc., linked to national policy. So this really comprises the effort at a macro level. And we did also include a margin for progress, because, first there will be availability of products in a few years that are quite different from what we know today, but also in building a trajectory, what we're doing is we're building a scenario. And this scenario, as Henri said well at the beginning, it will need adjustment, because the reality is always a bit different from what we expect previously. So what has been integrated in this trajectory is a reduction of basically, 62% in the carbon intensity by 2030, and with, I would say, going towards an ideal target of a 50% reduction compared to baseline. And we're going to see what it means in the next slide. So this is what a trajectory looks like. Basically, what this graph shows is the curve of expected carbon emissions over the next decade. And as you see, if there's no action, it will simply go up and up as the organization develops and grows. You see the impact of what we call structural effects, which is a scenario, so it's only relative. The reality will necessarily be different. But what it shows is, I think what's interesting with this graph is that what we call the structural effects only bring down the curve only in small proportions. You know, we estimate it to be around 12%. Maybe it will be 15, maybe 18, maybe 10. We'll see what the reality is. But what it shows is that the main levers to bring down emissions are actually internal. It's internal to an organization. And you see how each of the 5 big solutions bring down the trajectory closer to the ideal point that we want to reach, which is a 50% reduction compared to 2020. And there's a slight difference here between the planned, I would say the planned effort and the ideal effort, mainly from 2027 onwards, which I would say will be addressed based on reality in due time, and taking opportunities, seeing where challenges have been met, etc. Next. Henri.
Yeah, so for each of the 20 solutions that were evaluated and decided, we decided to have a set of key elements so that we have everything in place to monitor and to take action. Each solution has expected outcomes. Those ones have been evaluated, discussed based on the feasibility, the resource that needs to be put in place and so on. And they are time bound so that we already have a specific time in 2024 where we'll do a strong evaluation of where we are at to adapt and test alternative solution if need be. For each solution, we decided to have a strong set of indicators. It identified the data that needs to be collected, which is a key point in the roadmap and in the approach. You need to monitor, you need to get the right data at the right place and at the right time. But also for each solution, we have identified a focal point within the organization, a specialist, an expert that will help support and drive the team with regard to implementation. Next. And basically we did the same work for the resources and the means, meaning that it was important for us to be very pragmatic, and since the start and the development of the roadmap, to evaluate the means to put in place in front of each of the solution and have a more macro vision of it. Key points to share of this experience is that measurement is key. Again, you need to have a good evaluation, recurrent evaluation of the emissions, of the work that has been done. And you need to dig further on the quantity and the nature of the waste that are produced. As mentioned by Bruno, this is a key point on which we need to move forward at ALIMA. You need to have a piloting team in place with the right expertise and the right leadership to move the organization and the colleague on the right path. So what we decided to do at ALIMA is to secure that the piloting of the roadmap is made at the executive committee level, but also to hire and to have in the team one environmental project manager, and within the several departments of ALIMA to have the expertise at the right place. And specifically for the first year, to make sure that we have a manager with regard to the sustainable procurement policy that we need to develop and put in place. Strengthen our capacity and expertise with regard to water, sanitation, and waste management. And also to make sure that we have the right partnership externally to have the insight that we don't have internally. One of the core investments is knowledge and ability to take action. And this is crucial in our vision and in the time frame that we develop with the Climate Action Accelerator. It means two core things. First, the people that will be the focal points with regard to the solution needs to enhance their capacity, knowledge, and abilities with regard to those solutions. But the whole staff of ALIMA, wherever they are, at project, coordination level, HQ level, need also to be trained and sensitized on the global approach and the specific solution to be put in place. So that requires a real training strategy. That is one of the key things for the year one. And then, of course, finance is key. You need to invest and you will see some savings, but you need to plan that. And maybe, Bruno, you can give the key points you want to highlight.
So we did a cost analysis for the first 3 years of the implementation of the roadmap, and what we found actually confirms what several other organizations and institutions that have gone this way equally have found, which is in a way, it goes against a myth of something unaffordable. What we find is it's mainly around reallocation of resources. There are significant savings attached to some of the solutions that were presented, mainly in the transport area, not only, but mainly in the transport. And then you have a number of investments, notably on renewable energy, but also on actually human investments, increasing the level of competence inside, and of course the impact of environmental procurement criteria. So this is, I would say, until a precise policy is defined, it can only be, I would say, approximate. Okay. But what's maybe the message here that's important is that most of the analyses that are linked to these roadmaps tend to confirm the same conclusion, that it's we're rather looking at an equilibrium more than an explosion of costs. Okay. And some investments have actually relatively quick return. So this is context dependent. So here we have photovoltaics. It can be almost after 2-3 years, but it's not true in every context or in every circumstance. So it can be from 2-3 years up to 4-5 years, depending on the choices made. And of course, a lot of this depends on a number of actions and priorities, like the criteria, the channel policy, etc., which need to be put in place in 2022 to 2023. Of course, maybe the last point here on finance is to say that building roadmaps like this open funding opportunities. And as Henri said, it's key. But we've also shown, I mean, together over 2021, that from the very first year, it was possible to cover, the costs and the first costs and investments linked to this action through extra fundraising and simply mobilizing support. And so I think organizations should approach this in a relatively confident way. From the moment there's a kind of aggressive fundraising made and dialogue with both foundations and donors. Next. Henri.
Yes, in a nutshell, so and we will share the roadmap, ALIMA's roadmap view. Among the solutions, the strategies, and so on, we can sum up the roadmap with 10 key commitments that ALIMA is taking, and these 10 commitments will help us monitor and guide and drive the initiative. First, as we already mentioned, human investment is key. And it means that each ALIMA member needs to have the opportunity to contribute to the change, and that the organization at each level is able to give each staff the tools, the knowledge, trainings, the tips, so that they can participate to the global action. Two, you already mentioned that, but we have a holistic approach of integrating climate issues within our DNA. So we integrate climate issues in our humanitarian programs, and particularly on the components of research, operational research on our fields, on what you already can see with regard to the link between pollution, for instance, IRA with children, for instance, and so on. This has been already said, but the key objective with regard to emission is to reduce, based on the consensus and the global consensus and the global efforts that needs to be done. We are in line with that, halve our emissions by 2030 without using carbon offsets. Four, one of the tools for that main goal is the shift to renewable energy aggressively, as one of the objectives is to be in a position in 2030 where ALIMA's activities are dependent of renewable energy by 30% on programs. Five, implementing environmental charter for responsible purchasing, so that we get the good criteria, systemic decision-making in place to select our key items with regard to environmental criteria. This is one of the key work in 2022. Systematically assess the impact of our programs and actions, meaning that we need to integrate some of the criteria and checklists with regard to the environment and the ecosystem within our assessment tools. Then having in place the good responsibility at headquarters level, we really want to show the path and to have a leading by example approach, and so that we have a waste management and waste strategy that is very aggressive at coordination and HQ level, and particularly with the zero waste and zero single-use plastic policy. Above the internal actions, we also want to make sure, and that's one of the key points of the work with the Climate Action Accelerator, we want to be a pilot, we want to be open, we want to see what works, what doesn't work, what are the questions we are asking within the organization in the process. So we really are keen to disseminate our journey with the entire community, but also at very local level, to push and to have a domino effect with the health structure we are working with and the community we are serving. And then, again, that key domino effect, we really want to embed health authorities we are working with, national NGO we are working with in a more global climate action. So we are going to share what we are doing, share our roadmap, but also try to support them in initiating activities at local level. Bruno?
Yeah. So what learnings can we take away from this roadmap building and as we enter the implementation phase? So there's a few next. So first, that internal levers are actually very significant and can be turned into action. It doesn't mean that it's without challenges. For every solution and action, it's actually a program of work, and it's going to need several years to go through it. But the levers are there, they're significant, and with, I would say, strategic continuity and leadership, we can definitely go towards the reduction pathways that have been defined. The next lesson is, and recommendation is, focus on the few solutions with the greatest impact. Avoid dispersion. I mean, there are many ideas, etc., and all of them, I would say, are respectable. But from an organizational point of view, you have to put your weight where it matters most, and especially, I would say, for humanitarian action, but it's also true of many other forms of action. Well, you only have so much energy and space to work on this beside your social mission, and so this focus is critical. Leadership. Well, I think Henri has been very eloquent on this. Leadership, investment in people, much more than the costs and the finance. It's the key to success. I mean, a big lesson from this roadmap is that finance is not the challenge. It doesn't mean it doesn't need to be worked on. It doesn't need a strategy, but the real key to success is leadership and people. Fourth, well, you need a quantified approach to indicators and milestones, because it's the only way to measure success. And this is, I would say, it's a bit the crash test. I mean, it's nice to have good intentions and objectives, but if you can't turn them into quantified indicators, then basically they don't hold the ground. Fifth, well, avoided costs, as I said, can compensate for a large part of the investment, and probably for some organizations can actually compensate for all the investment. Now, it's much too early to generalize. There will be different situations for different organizations, but this is an important lesson. And finally, well, over a 9 to 10 year roadmap, you need to leave room for learning and adjustment. So this is not a precise action plan. It's a guide to action, and each of these solutions will have to be turned into projects. And it's by running these projects that learning improvement will happen. Next. The priorities for 2022. There's a lot coming after the roadmap itself. This is only the beginning. So what we find quite naturally is, well, putting in place the monitoring systems that need to happen on carbon and waste. And then you're going to find an emphasis on the 5 big solutions. So procurement, charter, and sourcing of key items. This is quite a heavy work in itself. It's going to take most of 2022 to be in a position to act in 2023. You're going to find the travel policy, the focus on solar panels, freight, shift to sea freight and order planning, but also pilots on health and environment projects, and dialogue with institutional donors to try to push them towards creating the facilitating environment to accompany this move. And Henri, I think you want to add one or two other points also on this.
No, I think it's crystal clear, so nothing much to add. Just that on the last points, maybe I think it's key because it's like a line of responsibilities in the partnership to be very open, very clear, and very pedagogic with the partners and the financial donors as well, to show our approach, to tell them that it's going to have impact, not very specifically on the overall level of budget, but on the way we will practice the allocation of resources within the budget for a time frame of 1 or 2 years. And we definitely see that more like a partnership rather than an aggressive advocacy toward the donors. I mean, we are in discussion, for instance, with ECHO, and ECHO has already its own strategy, priorities, and roadmap. So it will bring some criteria of allocations and in the coming years. So it's really about that. And then the last point is that I already mentioned that what is key is to have the people in place, the team in place, the team ready, the piloting team ready to move the organization. So this is also one of the key steps in the first months of 2022.
And the last info before we give the floor is that we'll be organizing a number of workshops in West Africa, jointly between ALIMA and the Climate Action Accelerator, to both share the experience and with national NGOs, operational partners in 4 different countries. And there will be also a regional event towards the end of the year to continue this sharing of experience.
Yeah. Thank you so much. We're gonna open the floor for questions. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so that we can maybe see everyone, and feel free to either write it in the chat or unmute yourself and go ahead and comment, ask questions. The floor is open. Catherine, you can go ahead.
Thank you very much. So I'm Catherine Bade from the ICRC, and I mean, first of all, I wanted to thank you all for this really informative presentation, and also congratulate, obviously, ALIMA for all the work that they've done. I think ICRC, we're embarking just now on this roadmap building, and it's extremely encouraging to see the progress and all the solutions already identified by ALIMA. I have 2 questions. The first one is about the cost that were identified as part of the initiative. I wondered if in the cost were also included some of what I would call specialized staff that you've identified, like the environmental project manager, for example, if those human resources were also included in the investment needed to run the roadmap. My second question is maybe a little bit more challenging, but please take this not as a questioning of the approach, but rather a curiosity to understand. I was wondering, you've left a bit of the pathway, the decarbonization pathway, as an innovation, basically something open. And I wondered if this really came out of a reflection about, I guess, the difficulty or the uncertainty associated with identifying how much each initiative would contribute to the trajectory, or whether it's actually, it came from the fact that you were not able to identify all the solutions to achieve the 50% reduction in emissions. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Catherine, for those questions. Maybe I can elaborate on the first point, and then something to say on the second one as well, but Bruno, you will take the lead. With regard to the cost, yes, we definitely took into account the HR and the recruitment of the specific staff. For instance, one of the key decisions was to have a dedicated person in managing and piloting the process. But to be very pragmatic, what we really try to do is to make sure that through the mobilization of resources and partners, we have those experts supported and financed by the projects that we have. If it's not the case, definitely we'll take the responsibility and we'll put the money. But again, so far so good. We already found the partners and the project to support those costs for the first year. So this is great news, and we'll continue to have that process, But HR is key. Again, HR is not only internally. The partnership we have, for instance, with the Climate Action Accelerator and other structure, help us to have the added value and the added expertise towards the implementation of the solution of the roadmap.
Yeah. So thanks. Yeah. So maybe on the second question, Catherine. So very good point. So I would say it's a mix of several factors. This last gap, and it's not only research and innovation. I mean, this is more a simplification. The reality is that, as you understand, it's a scenario. Okay, it's a scenario based on expected growth of the organization, based on what we can expect in terms of progress of society, and based on, I would say, the planned deployment, of course, of several solutions. So there are major uncertainties linked to this. I mean, here the growth pattern is a 50% growth over 10 years. Will it be 60? Will it be 30? Will it be whatever? We don't know exactly. Okay. On structural effects, we've been relatively conservative by saying, there'll be basically only a 12% reduction coming from external measures of national policy, etc. Some indications show that it could actually be faster when you look at the regions of productions of good, etc., or not. But so we've been relatively conservative, and then so I think basically when we modelized the solutions and the intensity of the efforts, we came to this result, which was considered already a relatively high and radical achievement, and we felt it wasn't necessarily key to go much further at this point, but it may be in 3 years. So, for example, in 3 years, we will have to look with the experience at how to bridge this gap and what's the direction of the different solutions. So I would say it's more linked to the general uncertainty level. It's not so much saying, well, we could not go further in absolute terms. It's that it was not necessarily necessary. Now, it's a point of discussion, and I think the more we work on these modelizations, the better it will be.
Thank you. Patricia, Rob, and Samantha, I see your raised hands. What I'm going to do perhaps is I'm going to ask the 2 questions that have been in the chat. So Henri and Bruno, you can keep them in mind. And as soon as they've answered them, the 3 of you can go ahead and ask your questions. One from Alexandre wants to know, how were the gains regarding purchasing measured? And I think this means on the decarbonization trajectory. And Niharika, who's joining us from India, wants to know how will, maybe this is a question for Henri, how will the initiatives be cascaded throughout the country offices, if it's going to be individual country offices managing that, or if it's going to be centrally driven?
Yeah, so on the gains on the purchasing part, actually in our calculations, there are no gains on the purchasing parts. There's only extra costs. So we considered that implementing environmental criteria would generally increase the cost of procurement. But this is this is probably the area where we have most, I would say, caveats, and where because until you define precisely the procurement policy, it's what you can do is only broad estimations. So we have been conservative. So we think, at least for the first 3 years, it's relatively reliable. But it's too early to say what would be the impact on procurement, for example, after 2024, 2025. It's
Bruno, I believe Alexandre meant the environmental gain, so the carbon reductions that are gained from purchasing. If that's something you can answer, maybe quickly.
Okay. Well, good question also. So for the environmental gains on the purchasing procurement part, it's an objective. It's an objective more than actually an analysis of the gains itself, because it's too early to say. You need an item by item approach if you want to, and you need to add up the analysis of the items. And I would say there's a difference in nature between the analysis for the procurement part, which is necessarily general at the beginning, versus the other solutions which are already specific. So what we learn from this basically is that we have to find ways on the different items to actually reduce by almost 50% the footprint linked to procurement. Okay, this is a condition to actually meet the target over time, and this will be a mix of criteria of regionalization, areas of production, etc. And it will be also a mix between internal efforts versus structural effects on producers.
Yeah, maybe Henri, you can answer quickly on the
Yes.
first question.
Thank you for the question. Very quickly, yes, the cascade and making sure that it's not too much central driven. I mean, when we started the process a year ago, we decided to have a very open approach so that all staff in ALIMA can participate. So in the workshops, in the interviews, on the participative platform that we put in place to have the ideas and feedbacks of the team, we had people from all the organization, everywhere, midwives, medical referents, logisticians, head of missions, and so on. So to make sure that we design something that can be put in place and by the projects and the coordination. What we are going to do as well is to make sure that the training, the priority training, will be done at local level. The vision that we have is that these are the ones that will put in place the activities. And so we are already in the process to also review the responsibilities and job description of some of the key profiles in the organization, so that the component, the environmental climate action, is embedded within that. For the first time in late 2021, we integrated in the preparation of the annual country priority plans of ALIMA a specific chapter dedicated to the approach. So for the first time in the past 3 months, every team in the field has prepared his annual plan, integrating the very first aspects of the roadmap. And all the process review in the year we have midterm reviews, we have an annual review. We'll have a component dedicated to that, and trainings adds up to that.
Thank you. What I'll do is I'll let Patricia and then Rob and then Samantha ask their questions, and I'll note them down in case maybe Bruno and Henri are not able to answer, and you can get your answers perhaps by email, but that way at least all the questions are asked. Please go ahead, Patricia. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And thank you again for the presentation, and also Henri for the openness. No, I think knowledge sharing is something intangible, but will also contribute for all to doing better. No, so thanks for that. I have a question. Probably there is not enough time to answer that, no, but about if you already have some hints on the how, no, because you have some of the objectives that we may already share with other organizations, like reducing your transport or having more efficient car transport and all that. If you already have some, we know you just mentioned, no, the buying more local, but the target is big enough, not to maybe if you have other hints on that. Thank you.
So just in a few words, you'll find in the roadmap of ALIMA, which by the way is being translated into English, and you'll have access to an English version by middle of next week. You'll find a number of descriptions of solutions and actions. But we have to be clear, this is not a detailed plan of action, okay? So what comes next is with each, I would say, project lead is actually to turn these solutions and actions identified into proper projects with a project management, with what has to be done year by year, etc. And what we will be doing also with our different partners is getting more, bringing more and more precision over time, and we will be also sharing these on our digital platform, sharing platform, which will be operational by April, I guess. And here you will have progressively more and more precision over the types of actions and the descriptions.
Thank you. Rob, go ahead, and then Samantha. We can't hear you yet. Yeah.
Sorry. Hello, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for this. It's very interesting, and it really shows the way. And thanks for indeed being open on all this process. I have a question for Henri on the kind of leadership and governance of this process within the organization. So I'm coming from MSF, and we're indeed also starting in this journey. What I can already see is that there's tensions on this subject within the organization. So on the one side, you have people that are more cautious. Let's say that okay, this is good to work towards these goals, but it cannot impact our medical or social mission, as you've also mentioned. And the other side, there's also tensions of people that say, okay, let's not be overly focused on our own greenhouse gas emissions, as it is a relatively small story, let's say, compared to the work perhaps that needs to be done on better understanding climate impacts where we work and adapting our operations to them, and allowing témoignage or witnessing of that. So all of that costs energy, and there might be a tension of people saying, okay, putting all the energy on greenhouse gas emissions might take energy of the other aspects. So I don't know if these are tensions that you noticed within the organization leading up to this process, and how in the end you balance this, thank you.
Thank you, Rob. If Samantha can ask a question, and then Henri, you can say how you can.
Hi, thank you very much. I was wondering if you could give more detail about the aggressive approach to donors, and how does that translate? I've been in discussions with many humanitarian donors over the past few months, and I have a sense that there's not much flexibility as to fund projects that are more sustainable, but perhaps more expensive. And I'm thinking in specific about the solar energy. So I was just interested to hear your thoughts about how this could be, how does this translate, and if you had any recommendations for other organizations.
Yeah, okay. May I answer now, Zaninka?
Yes.
It's fine? Okay. For the first question, thank you. Again, it doesn't mean that there is no debates within ALIMA, but we really wanted to have a consensus on the fact that we need to move forward. And as I explained, there are different criteria that we took into consideration to move and to decide to develop. What we really want to make sure of during the process is two things, and they are not competitive actually. The first one is, again, leadership. We don't want this approach to be, again, a side project or a project driven by logistic assistance with all due respect and so on of the organization, but that it's going to change the organization. And that's why we decided to put the resource and the leadership in place so that it's a cross-cutting and holistic approach driven by the organization and by the executive committee. And this is very important because in terms of emergencies, where you have pandemics going on, Ebola outbreaks there, and so on, you already try to prioritize. And sometimes you prioritize and you put in the fridge some of the strategic approach of the organization. And this is not what we are going to do. So this is the first thing. The other one is to have the box open, and we started like that with this collective intelligence platform to make sure that we get the feedback from the team during the process very recurrently, that we have the concerns, the questions, the mistakes in mind, so that we can adapt. And if we let that box open to the entire organization, we think we can manage to adapt and to continue the debate in the right way. The second question with regard to the donors, when I say so far so good, it means that during the process of developing our roadmap, our objectives, our carbon footprint, and so on, we decided to start putting the issue on the table with our partners and donors. You know, the business model of ALIMA is quite simple, and we are definitely dependent from donors so far, because individual fundraising is a small part of our resources. So we anticipated that, and we wanted to put it on the table every time we discussed about nutrition, about outbreaks, and so on, to say we are in that process. We will need support. We will need understanding that our project, our budget will shift a little bit so that we integrate that. And there are two ways to do this aggressive fundraising and this aggressive discussion with regard to climate change. You can look for budgets dedicated to the approach. So find someone who will support ALIMA in developing an environmental roadmap. This will be the exception, definitely. But the core work we need to do in the coming years, again in partnerships, is to explain that to do malnutrition, to do response to outbreak, to do surgery, we can continue to do that, but we need to adapt the way we budget it. And if you look at not a long-term but the mid-term perspective, the savings of the investment during the first year will be balanced. So again, it's discussion, and so far we have the ear is open, the discussions are good, and we already secured some projects through those donors that are open on that path. So it gives us definitely confidence. Will it work every time? I don't know, but so far, they are open and it works.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's no longer any questions, which is perfect. We are right on time. Just wanted to really, again, thank everyone for joining us and for your questions. There's going to be like another one in French tomorrow. And just like Bruno said, we're going to be sharing both the presentation, the roadmap. Once it's translated, you will also get access to that. And I'll also include both Henri and Bruno's emails so that you can contact them if you have any more questions you weren't able to ask today. Again, thank you, and hope you can still have your lunch, or perhaps you had it during the call. So thank you again, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks very much.